Please, please wake up. I need you.
The rain began before dawn, tapping softly on the cracked rooftop of a small one-room apartment in the heart of the city. The streets outside were already awake with the hum of early traffic, vendors setting up their stalls, and the distant call of buses heading downtown. Inside that room lived Grace Daniels, a 30-year-old janitor who had long accepted that life often greeted her with dust before it offered diamonds. Her world was small but honest. A mop, a bucket, and a dream she hadn't yet given permission to die. Grace rose quietly, her bare feet brushing against the cold cement floor, whispering a short prayer before tying her old blue scarf around her hair. To her, every day was a battlefield of dignity. The city didn't care about the poor. It was a place that swallowed voices unless they screamed with money. Grace walked to the window and looked out at the grey sky, the kind that made even hope shiver. She thought about her mother gone too soon and her father who used to say, "Even a broom has pride if it stands straight." Those words had kept her alive through hunger, heartbreak, and humiliation. And today she whispered them again. By 6 a.m., Grace was already at Silvercrest Towers, a high-rise filled with people who lived lives she could only imagine. The lobby smelled of perfume and expensive coffee, scents that reminded her she didn't belong. But Grace moved like water, unnoticed, yet essential. Her reflection flashed briefly in the polished glass walls as she mopped the marble floor. She caught sight of herself. Tired eyes, clean uniform, quiet strength. Then the elevator doors opened and out stepped Ethan Cole, the billionaire owner of the building. She froze. He was everything the world called successful. Tailored suit, deep voice, and a face that could command silence. Ethan didn't notice her at first. He was on his phone, arguing with someone about stock values and board meetings. Grace lowered her head as he passed, but fate had strange timing that morning. The billionaire suddenly clutched his chest, gasped, and collapsed to the ground. His phone skidded across the marble, his breath shallow. Panic filled the air. The security guard ran for help, but Grace dropped her mop and rushed to him. She had learned basic CPR years ago during a charity first aid class, never knowing it would one day test her courage. "Sir, can you hear me?" she cried, kneeling beside him. Ethan's lips were turning pale. His pulse was weak. Without hesitation, Grace began chest compressions, counting under her breath, steady and firm. When his breathing stopped completely, she did the unthinkable. She leaned down and pressed her lips to his, giving him breath when life itself seemed to abandon him. The security guards watched in shock. Time stood still. 1 minute of chaos, one heartbeat, then another. Ethan gasped suddenly, eyes wide, life rushing back into his body. Grace sat back, trembling, tears mixing with sweat. When the ambulance arrived, the billionaire's assistant pointed at Grace, eyes wide in disbelief. "That's the woman who saved him," he said. Cameras flashed as onlookers gathered. Grace wanted to vanish. She wasn't ready for attention. The paramedics lifted Ethan onto a stretcher, his gaze meeting hers for a brief second. Gratitude, confusion, something unspoken. As they wheeled him away, Grace's heart raced. She picked up her mop, hands shaking. She didn't know it yet, but that single kiss, born from mercy, not love, had just rewritten the entire map of her destiny. Morning sunlight crept through the slatted blinds of the janitor's room at Silvercrest Towers, painting thin golden lines across Grace's face. The building was louder than usual. Whispers carried through the corridors like restless spirits. Everyone talking about the billionaire who nearly died and the janitor who had saved him. Grace sat on a plastic chair, her hands trembling around a cup of lukewarm tea. She didn't want to be a hero. She wanted peace. But the world didn't ask for permission when it decided to see you. Her phone buzzed with messages from co-workers. Blurry photos of her kneeling beside Ethan Cole had gone viral overnight. "You kissed a billionaire?" one message teased. Another said, "Girl, you just saved your way into fortune." she sighed. People saw gossip, not gratitude. By noon, Grace's supervisor, Mrs. Chidamar, called her into the office. The older woman's eyes were sharp behind her glasses. "Grace, you've brought attention to this company," she said. "Good attention, maybe. But you know how the rich are. They don't like stories that make them look weak." Grace nodded quietly. She hadn't slept well, replaying the moment in her mind, the collapse, the silence, the kiss that saved him. She felt no shame, only worry. "Do you think he'll be okay?" she asked softly. Mrs. Chidamar's stern expression softened. "You did what no one else had courage to do," she said. "Now let's pray he remembers that." Outside, the parking lot shimmered with heat. Grace walked to the bus stop, her uniform clinging to her back from sweat. As she waited, she noticed people staring, some in awe, some in mockery. A group of young men pointed and laughed. "That's the janitor who kissed the boss," one shouted. Grace looked away, clutching her small handbag. The bus arrived late, packed with noise and body heat. She stood by the window, watching the city rush past. Billboards of luxury, people chasing dreams she couldn't afford. When she reached home, the small compound was already buzzing. Her neighbour, Auntie Beatrice, waved excitedly. "Grace, I saw you on TV," she said, smiling with all her teeth. "Ha! You kissed wealth itself." Grace forced a laugh, pretending it was all nothing. Inside, her room felt even smaller now that the world had peeked inside it. That evening, she turned on her old radio. The announcer's voice was smooth, dramatic. "Breaking news. The billionaire philanthropist Ethan Cole is recovering after a sudden heart attack at his company's headquarters. Sources say a female janitor saved his life with CPR. Witnesses describe it as a kiss from destiny." Grace's heart pounded. She turned the radio off. That phrase, "a kiss from destiny," felt too heavy, too strange. She wanted her quiet back, but fate had already found her name. She lay down on her bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if Ethan even remembered her face. She didn't know that across the city, in a hospital suite guarded by bodyguards, Ethan Cole was asking his assistant the same question. Who was that woman? The next morning, a black SUV stopped in front of Grace's compound. The neighbours gathered instantly, gossip spilling like smoke. 2 men in suits stepped out and knocked on her door. Grace froze, towel in hand. "Miss Grace Daniels?" one asked politely. "Mr. Ethan Cole wishes to see you." Her knees weakened. "Me? Why?" she stammered. "He said it's personal," the man replied. For a long moment, Grace stood silent, her heart beating like a drum in her chest. She thought of her wrinkled uniform, her old shoes, her trembling hands. Life had taught her that when the rich came calling, it wasn't always for good. But something inside her, the same courage that made her press her lips to a dying man, whispered, "Go." She nodded slowly and stepped toward the car that would take her into a world she'd only cleaned from a distance. The hospital lobby smelled of disinfectant and lilies, the kind of clean that felt both sacred and lonely. Grace sat on the edge of a leather couch, twisting her hands nervously as nurses and guards whispered. She wore her best clothes, a pale yellow blouse and a skirt that had seen too many Sundays. Her heart thudded in her chest like a drum in slow rhythm. When the elevator doors opened, a man in a grey suit approached. "Miss Grace Daniels?" he asked softly. "Mr. Cole will see you now." She nodded, her voice caught somewhere between fear and disbelief. The hallway leading to Ethan's private suite felt endless, lined with white walls and quiet judgment. Inside, Ethan Cole sat propped up against crisp white pillows, tubes running into his arm, the faint beep of machines behind him. But even in weakness, he carried an aura of command. His eyes lifted slowly as Grace entered. For a moment, neither spoke. She bowed slightly. "Good morning, sir." Her voice trembled. Ethan studied her, the woman who had given him breath. "So, you're the janitor," he said quietly, his tone unreadable. Grace nodded, unsure if it was gratitude or disdain she heard. "You saved my life," he added after a pause, his gaze softening. and I don't even know your story." Grace swallowed hard, unsure how much to say. "It was nothing, sir. Anyone would have done it," she said. Ethan smiled faintly, though pain shadowed his expression. "No," he murmured. "They wouldn't have." He gestured to a chair. "Please sit." She obeyed hesitantly, hands folded in her lap. For a while, silence filled the room. Two lives that should never have crossed, bound by a single act of mercy. Then Ethan spoke again, voice lower this time. "Do you believe in fate, Grace?" She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I believe God arranges things we don't understand," she said. "Sometimes we meet people for reasons that don't make sense until later." Ethan looked away, thoughtful. Then maybe this was one of those times. A nurse entered to check his vitals, breaking the spell. Grace rose to leave, but Ethan stopped her gently. "Wait, you work at my building, right?" She nodded. "I'll make sure you're rewarded properly," he said. Grace shook her head quickly. "Please, sir, I don't want money. I just wanted you to live." Her words surprised him. Most people around Ethan saw him as a wallet, not a man. For the first time in years, he felt something shift, a strange peace in her humility. "Then at least allow me to thank you properly," he insisted. "Come back tomorrow, lunch? No cameras." Grace blinked, unsure how to respond. "Sir, I'm just a cleaner," she whispered. "Then maybe," Ethan replied, "the world needs more cleaners." That night, Grace lay awake, replaying the meeting in her mind. His eyes had been tired but kind, his tone firm yet gentle. She had felt seen, not as a janitor but as a person. Outside, thunder rumbled, and the rain began again, drumming softly on her roof just like the morning their fates collided. In another part of the city, Ethan stared out his hospital window, wondering why the touch of a stranger's hands and the breath of a humble woman lingered longer in his heart than any business deal ever had. Two worlds had met by accident, but destiny had already decided they wouldn't part easily. The next afternoon, the hospital garden shimmered under gentle sunlight. Grace arrived early, clutching a small brown purse and wearing her cleanest uniform. She felt out of place among the nurses, reporters, and polished visitors in designer clothes. She found a quiet bench near the fountain, where Ethan Cole was already waiting, dressed simply in a white shirt and grey trousers. He smiled faintly when he saw her. "You came," he said. "I almost thought you wouldn't." Grace returned a nervous smile. "I promised," she replied softly. The scent of blooming hibiscus surrounded them as a nurse brought their meals, grilled fish, rice, and fruit juice that tasted like luxury itself. Grace hesitated before touching the food. "I'm not sure I belong here," she admitted. Ethan's eyes softened. "You belong wherever your heart leads you. Don't let the world convince you. Otherwise." They ate mostly in silence, the air thick with unspoken curiosity. Ethan asked about her life, her family, and how long she'd worked at Silvercrest Towers. Grace answered honestly, 10 years of cleaning, saving, and surviving. "Do you ever dream of leaving that job?" he asked. She laughed lightly. "Every day. But dreams cost money, and I'm not rich enough to afford disappointment." Ethan smiled sadly, hearing a kind of truth he'd forgotten existed. "You remind me of my mother," he said quietly. "She was a housemaid before my father found success. She never let pride make her cruel." Grace looked at him, surprised. "You talk about her like she's still here." His expression darkened. "She's not. I lost her when I was 19. Maybe that's why I pushed too hard. I'm still trying to build a world where her sacrifices make sense." A soft breeze passed between them, carrying the smell of rain and roses. Grace listened intently, her eyes reflecting empathy instead of pity. Ethan had met thousands of people, but none had ever listened the way she did, without judgment or interest in what he could offer. "You should tell your story one day," she said gently. "People think wealth means peace, but sometimes it's just noise with a better sound system." Ethan chuckled, a sound rare even to his own ears. For the first time since his collapse, He felt human again. When Grace rose to leave, he stood too. "Grace," he said, "after I'm discharged, I want you to work directly under me at Silvercrest. You'll supervise cleaning across all floors. Better pay, better hours." Her mouth fell open. "Sir, that's too much." He smiled. "It's not a gift. It's a correction." That evening, as she rode home on the bus, Grace stared out the window at the glowing skyline. She didn't fully understand what was happening, whether it was luck, destiny, or divine reward. The passengers around her chatted loudly about politics and football, but Grace heard only her heart's quiet rhythm. Somewhere in that noise, she realized something had changed. The man she'd saved wasn't just alive. He was beginning to live differently. And maybe, just maybe, so was she. 2 weeks later, the hospital released Ethan Cole to a wave of cameras and flashing lights. Reporters shouted questions as his convoy rolled through the gates, but the billionaire's calm expression hid more than his words revealed. Inside the tinted car, he stared at the skyline, lost in thought. "Schedule a meeting with the board next Monday," he told his assistant, "and find Grace Daniels. I want her contract ready." His assistant nodded, secretly intrigued by the mysterious janitor who had everyone talking. By the time Ethan returned to Silvercrest Towers, word had spread. The owner had promoted a cleaner. Some called it compassion, others called it madness. Grace arrived the next morning, her uniform, replaced with a neat corporate outfit provided by HR. Yet every step she took felt heavy with eyes and whispers. In the cafeteria, some staff smiled and congratulated her, while others sneered behind her back. "Imagine, a cleaner sitting in management meetings," one woman whispered. "She probably used that CPR kiss to climb," another joked cruelly. Grace kept her head high, remembering her father's words. "Even a broom has pride if it stands straight." That afternoon, she received an invitation to Ethan's office. The elevator ride to the top floor felt like a journey between worlds. When the doors opened, she found him standing by the window, overlooking the city. "How are you settling in?" he asked kindly. "It's overwhelming," she admitted. He smiled. "Good. Growth should always feel uncomfortable at first." Then his tone softened. "Grace, I need your honesty. Did you ever think that day, when you gave me CPR, would bring us here?" She shook her head slowly. "Sir, I was just trying to save a man, not my life." Ethan laughed quietly. "Then maybe that's why you deserve everything coming your way." Their conversation flowed easily after that, about leadership, humility, and the strange bridge between wealth and worth. He asked her opinion on small things, how the cleaning staff were treated, what improvements could be made. Grace spoke with sincerity, and Ethan listened as though she carried gold in her words. For the first time, the billionaire saw his empire from the eyes of the invisible. When she left the office, Ethan watched her go, with a faint smile. Something in her presence humbled him, a purity that reminded him of what success was supposed to mean before greed distorted it. But not everyone shared his admiration. That evening, a meeting took place in a corner of the management lounge. Several department heads gathered, their voices low and bitter. "He's making a spectacle of himself," one muttered. "Promoting a janitor. What next? Charity for promotions?" Another added. "That woman's going to be his downfall." They didn't know that greed had already begun to weave its trap, and Grace, innocent, grateful, and unguarded, was walking straight into it. Later that night, as Grace returned home, she noticed a black car parked near her street. The headlights flickered once, then went dark. She felt a chill run through her spine but ignored it, clutching her handbag tighter. She didn't yet know that some people would rather destroy her than let her remind them what goodness looks like. 3 weeks into her new position, Grace began to notice how silence could wound more than words. Conversations stopped when she entered a room. Smiles disappeared as quickly as they appeared. Still, she did her job with care, arriving early, inspecting the cleaning crews, ensuring every corridor gleamed. Ethan's trust in her gave her strength. But behind that trust, invisible enemies were gathering. One morning she arrived to find her office door slightly open. Inside, papers were scattered, drawers pulled out. Her heart raced. She checked the drawer where she kept the staff attendance logs. Half the sheets were missing. Before she could process it, her phone buzzed with a message from HR. Report to the boardroom immediately. Fear chilled her blood. The boardroom felt colder than the air conditioner could explain. 5 executives sat around the long glass table. Ethan wasn't there. At the head sat Mr. Dube, the operations director, a man whose smile never reached his eyes. "Miss Daniels," he began smoothly, "we've received complaints of payroll discrepancies in your department. Funds missing, records altered." Grace blinked, confused. "Sir, I haven't handled money. I only submit reports." He slid a file toward her. Inside were copies of transfer slips, all bearing her name. Her breath caught. "This isn't mine," she whispered. But he was already shaking his head. "Until we finish investigating, you're suspended without pay." Grace's world tilted. The room spun. The same co-workers who once clapped for her now watched in silent satisfaction. She left the building numb, clutching the suspension letter like a death notice. Outside, reporters waited again, cameras flashing. "Grace, did the Billionaire's janitor get caught stealing?" one shouted. Her lips trembled, but she kept walking. Each click of a camera felt like a slap. That evening, she locked herself in her room and cried, long, painful tears that tasted like betrayal. She remembered her mother's voice saying, "A good heart will always be tested before it is trusted." Grace whispered those words into the darkness until sleep claimed her. Somewhere across the city, Ethan Cole sat in a private meeting when his phone buzzed. His assistant hesitated before speaking. "Sir, there's something you should see." On the screen flashed the headline, "Billionaire's Cleaner in Corruption Scandal." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Get me everything on this," he said sharply. His instincts told him it was a setup. By morning, Grace's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Journalists, gossip bloggers, and strangers with cruel curiosity. She ignored them all. She walked to the market to clear her head, but even there whispers followed her. "That's her," someone murmured. "The one who kissed money and stole it too." Her heart sank. She bought a loaf of bread with her last few coins, her dignity the only thing she had left. As she walked home, her eyes caught a billboard of Ethan Cole smiling under the slogan, "Integrity builds nations." She almost laughed at the irony. That night, a knock came at her door. It was a young cleaner from Silver Crest, breathless. "Madam Grace," he whispered. "They planted those papers. Mr. Dube and his people. They want you gone before Mr. Cole finds out the truth." Grace's hands trembled as realization struck. Her kindness had threatened their corruption. And now they wanted to bury it, with her name on the grave. The next morning, Grace made her way to Ethan's mansion, a massive estate surrounded by white fences and guarded gates. The security guards stopped her at once. "You can't enter without an appointment," one said. "Please," she begged, clutching her letter. "I need to see him, it's urgent." They exchanged glances, unmoved. She turned to leave, but fate wasn't done with her yet. A black SUV pulled into the driveway and Ethan himself stepped out, wearing dark sunglasses and a look of quiet command. When he saw her standing by the gate, soaked in sweat and desperation, he froze. "Grace," he said, removing his glasses. "What happened to you?" She handed him the suspension letter silently, her eyes red. He scanned it, his expression darkening. "Get in the car," he ordered. The guard stepped aside immediately. Inside, silence filled the air. Grace's voice trembled as she spoke. "They forged my name on documents. They said I stole money. I swear to you I didn't." Ethan didn't interrupt. He just listened, his jaw tightening with every word. When she finished, he said quietly, "I believe you." Grace's eyes widened. "You do?" He nodded. "Yes, because greed leaves fingerprints, and yours are too clean." He turned to his driver. "Take us to the office." Grace's heart pounded. She hadn't expected mercy, not from a billionaire. Within an hour, they arrived at Silvercrest Towers. The building that had once felt like a palace now looked like a battlefield. Ethan marched through the doors with Grace behind him, and every head turned. The rumor of her fall was still fresh, but what came next would silence the halls. Ethan called an emergency meeting. The board members gathered, pretending surprise. Mr. Dube stood to speak, but Ethan cut him off. "Before you open your mouth, I've already seen the audit," he said coldly. He dropped a file on the table, internal surveillance photos, timestamps, and digital evidence showing Dube and two others accessing Grace's office the night before the records went missing. "You framed an innocent woman," Ethan said, his voice like steel. "And you did it because she reminded you of everything you lost. Honesty." The room fell silent. Mr. Dube tried to stammer an excuse, but Ethan's eyes burned with restrained fury. "You're fired, all of you, and if I find one missing cent, prison will be your next office." Grace stood quietly at the corner, tears filling her eyes, not from revenge but from relief. As the guilty men were escorted out, Ethan turned to Grace. "I told you I'd make things right," he said softly. "But next time, promise me something. Never let lies make you doubt your worth." She nodded, her voice breaking. "Thank you, sir." "I don't know what to say." "Then don't," he replied. "Just keep standing." The staff watched in awe as Grace walked past them, her head high. The same people who whispered against her now whispered about her strength. But peace, as she would soon learn, doesn't last long in a world addicted to chaos. That evening, as Ethan's car dropped her home, Grace gazed out at the sunset. Orange fire melting into grey clouds. She thought of how quickly the same sun could rise on hope and set on despair. Life was strange like that. Inside the car, Ethan watched her quietly, realizing something he hadn't wanted to admit. His gratitude had turned into admiration. But admiration can be dangerous when the world is watching. Somewhere in the shadows, cameras had already begun to click again. What the world would make of their friendship next, neither of them was ready to face. By the next week, the story had exploded. News blogs ran wild with headlines like "Billionaire's heroine or hidden lover," and "Janitor who saved the boss now controls his heart." Photos of Grace leaving Ethan's mansion circulated online, her tired face twisted into tales she never told. On social media, people debated her existence. Some called her a gold digger, others a miracle worker. Grace stopped reading after the first day. Words, she realized, could cut deeper than knives. At Silvercrest Towers, her co-workers treated her like a ghost. Too famous to be ignored, too controversial to be embraced. Even her small church whispered behind her back. "She should have stayed in her lane," one woman said. Grace bowed her head, pretending not to hear. Meanwhile, Ethan faced his own war. At a shareholders' meeting, one investor asked bluntly, "Are we running a company or a charity case?" Ethan's voice was calm, but his eyes hardened. "We're running a company that still believes in humanity," he said firmly. But after the meeting, his PR advisor cornered him. "Sir, this relationship with Grace is ruining your image. The media thinks she's more than an employee." Ethan sighed deeply. "I don't care what they think." The advisor leaned closer. "You should. One wrong headline can burn years of work." Ethan turned away, gazing out his office window at the city skyline. "If doing right ruins me," he said, "then maybe I built the wrong empire." That evening, Grace received a call from an unknown number. "Miss Daniels," a female voice said, "I'm a journalist from Cityscope magazine. We'd like to pay you for an exclusive interview about your relationship with Mr. Cole." Grace froze. There is no relationship, she said firmly. He's my boss, the journalist chuckled softly. Then say that on camera. People love a humble hero. We'll pay you 500,000 naira. Grace hesitated for a split second before hanging up. Money could ease her suffering, but lies would stain her soul. She chose silence. Yet silence didn't stop the noise. It only made the world invent louder lies. 2 days later, Ethan invited her to his office again. His eyes looked tired, shadows forming beneath them. Grace, he said gently, you don't deserve this kind of attention. Maybe you should take some time off. Her heart sank. You're sending me away? He shook his head. No, I'm trying to protect you. These people are cruel. They don't see your heart, only their own reflections. Grace looked down at her hands. If you send me away, they'll think the rumors are true, she said softly. Ethan's silence answered for him. Sometimes doing the right thing still looks wrong from the outside. Then I'll stay, she said quietly. Let them talk. The truth will outlive the noise. Ethan nodded slowly, admiring her courage, even as he feared what it might cost her. That night, Grace walked home through a drizzle that smelled like dust and tears. At a small kiosk, she bought roasted corn and water, her comfort meal when life grew heavy. As she walked, her phone vibrated again. Another anonymous message. This one said, "You think you're safe because the boss likes you? You'll regret what you stole from us." Grace's steps slowed. She looked around but saw no one. The streetlights flickered weakly. Somewhere in the shadows, someone was watching. Days turned into weeks, and tension thickened like smoke. Ethan's company began losing contracts as rival firms whispered scandals into boardrooms. He's distracted, one investor said. Too busy playing savior. Ethan's closest friend, Daniel Harper, a sharp-tongued businessman, confronted him over dinner. You've built an empire with your mind, Daniel said. Don't destroy it with your heart. Ethan leaned back, weary. She's innocent, Daniel. She saved my life. Daniel smirked. And now she's saving your reputation by sinking it. Ethan clenched his jaw. You don't know her. Neither do you, Daniel shot back. The words stung because they were partly true. Ethan cared for Grace, but he didn't know where admiration ended and something deeper began. Grace, meanwhile, found her peace in routine. She still came to work before sunrise, even when gossip chased her through the corridors. She smiled at cleaners, greeted receptionists, and ignored the cold glances. Her strength came from small things, the laughter of children on her street, her evening prayers, the memory of her mother's voice. But one afternoon, as she was inspecting the 12th floor corridor, 2 men cornered her near the maintenance room. You made us lose our jobs, one hissed. Former supervisors dismissed after the corruption scandal. You think you're safe just because the boss likes you? She tried to back away, but one grabbed her wrist. Next time, mind your place, he warned, shoving her roughly against the wall before walking off. Grace stood frozen, her heart pounding, tears welling but refusing to fall. That evening she sat at the bus stop, trembling, holding her bruised wrist. A stranger offered her a seat. You look like the world just slapped you, the woman said kindly. Grace smiled weakly. It probably did. When she got home, she locked the door and wept quietly. Not for the pain, but for how easily goodness invites cruelty. She wrote a short prayer in her notebook. Lord, don't let me lose my heart because of those who have none. The next morning, Ethan noticed the bandage on her wrist. His face hardened. Who did that? He demanded. Grace hesitated, afraid of causing more trouble. It's nothing, she murmured. But Ethan wasn't fooled. He clenched his fists. If they touch you again, I'll destroy everything they've built. His voice trembled with anger, not the fury of a boss, but the protectiveness of a man whose heart was no longer his own. By then, rumors had become reality. The tabloids now printed headlines with her name beside his, wrapped in scandal. Paparazzi waited outside her home. One night she returned to find her door vandalized. Red paint splashed across the wall with the words, "Billionaire's pet." Grace sank to her knees, covering her face as neighbours whispered from the shadows. The next morning, she didn't go to work. She sat by her window, watching the rain fall. She thought of quitting, disappearing, starting over somewhere no one knew her name. But then she remembered the day Ethan collapsed, the day her heart chose courage over fear. She whispered to herself, "If I ran then, he'd be dead. If I run now, my faith will die." She stood up, wiped her tears, and began to pack her bag. Tomorrow she would face the world again. But something inside her had changed forever. Grace didn't sleep that night. Her thoughts ran in circles, chasing questions that had no answers. Why did goodness always bleed before it bloomed? By morning her eyes were swollen from crying, but her spirit was strangely calm, the calm that comes after breaking. She arrived at Silvercrest Towers before dawn, ignoring the curious stares of guards who thought she'd finally given up. As she walked through the quiet lobby, she whispered, "I didn't come this far to quit." When she reached her floor, she found a note on her desk written in elegant handwriting. "Grace, meet me at the rooftop at 8 a.m. Ethan." Her heart skipped. She hesitated, unsure if it was real or another trap, but she went anyway. The rooftop was bathed in gold morning light. Ethan stood near the railing, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the horizon. When he turned, Grace saw exhaustion behind his calm. "You didn't come to work yesterday," he said softly. "I was worried." She forced a faint smile. "I didn't want to cause more trouble." He shook his head. "You didn't cause trouble. You revealed truth. And the world doesn't forgive that easily." He took a step closer. "I can't stand watching them destroy you because of me." Grace met his gaze. "Then don't watch. Fight with me," she said, her voice trembling but steady. Something in her defiance rekindled his fire. "You're right," he said finally. "It's time I stopped protecting my image and started protecting what's right." That same week, Ethan called for a press conference, live, unfiltered, and unscripted. The hall was filled with journalists eager for scandal. Cameras flashed like lightning as he stepped onto the podium. Grace stood quietly at the back, her hands shaking. Ethan began calmly, his deep voice echoing through the room. "There's been a lot said about me and Miss Grace Daniels," he started. "Let me tell you the truth. She saved my life, and she continues to remind me what life actually means." Gasps rippled across the hall. He continued, "There's no affair, no manipulation, only gratitude and respect. If protecting integrity makes me unpopular, then I'll gladly be misunderstood." The room fell silent for a moment before reporters erupted in questions. Ethan raised his hand. "That's all," he said firmly, and walked off stage. That moment broke the internet again, but differently. Some mocked him, calling it a billionaire's fairy tale. Others praised his courage. For Grace, it was liberation. She cried quietly in the corner of her small room that night, whispering, "Thank you, Lord. Truth still breathes." But peace was fragile. Hours later, her phone rang. It was Daniel Harper, Ethan's friend. His voice was grim. "Grace, Ethan was attacked on his way home. Someone rammed his car off the bridge. He's in critical condition." The phone slipped from her hand, her world blurred. She rushed out into the rain barefoot, flagging down a taxi. As thunder cracked overhead, she whispered the same words she had spoken months ago. "Please let him live." The city lights blurred through her tears as she rode toward the hospital, her heart pounding with fear and faith. When she arrived, the waiting room buzzed with chaos. Doctors rushing, bodyguards whispering, reporters circling. A nurse recognized her immediately. "You can't go in," she said. "He's in surgery." Grace pressed her palms together. "Please," she whispered, "just let me wait." The nurse nodded softly. Hours passed like years. When the surgeon finally emerged, his eyes were weary but calm. "He made it," he said. Grace broke down, sinking to her knees in relief. She didn't care who was watching. She had saved his life once before. Now heaven had done it again. Ethan spent 2 weeks recovering in silence. The attack had left him shaken but alive. Grace visited every day, though quietly, bringing fruits, books, and prayers. She avoided the cameras, the whispers, the gossip. Every time she walked into his room, Ethan smiled faintly, as though her presence alone mended him. "You shouldn't be here so often," he joked one afternoon. "People will talk again." She smiled softly. "Let them. They'll get tired eventually." He chuckled weakly. "You really believe that?" She nodded. "I believe storms don't last, even if they leave mud behind." Her calm faith humbled him. For the first time in years, he prayed, not for success, but for clarity. When he was finally discharged, he called for Grace. "I want to show you something," he said. He drove her to a quiet plot of land on the outskirts of the city, acres of open space framed by distant hills. "I bought this place years ago," he said. "Planned to build another luxury estate. But I've changed my mind." Grace looked puzzled. "What will you do with it?" Ethan smiled. "Build something that actually helps people. A vocational centre for cleaners, drivers, nannies. Anyone forgotten by the system." Her eyes widened. "That's beautiful," she whispered. He turned to her. "You'll run it." She froze. "Me?" "Yes," he said simply. "You know their world better than anyone. You'll teach them what I forgot. Dignity isn't given, it's lived." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "Sir, I'm not qualified." Ethan smiled warmly. "Neither was I once, but someone believed in me." For a moment, neither spoke. The wind carried the scent of wet grass, and somewhere in the distance, children's laughter floated from a nearby village. Grace turned away slightly, hiding her tears. "Why are you doing this for me?" she asked softly. Ethan looked at her, his voice low. "Because you did something no one ever did. You treated me like a man, not a millionaire." That simple sentence melted the last wall between them. Grace didn't know whether to thank him or cry. She just whispered, "Then let's build something that lasts." Weeks later, construction began. Grace worked tirelessly, supervising every detail, training new recruits, guiding young women who reminded her of her past self. The press returned, but this time their tone was different. "The janitor who saved a billionaire now saves hundreds," read one headline. Donors began pouring in. The project became a national story, a rare marriage of wealth and humility. Yet through all the praise, Grace stayed grounded. When reporters asked for interviews, she simply said, "It's not my story. It's God's mercy written in brick and sweat." One evening, as the sun set over the newly rising centre, Ethan joined her on the unfinished rooftop. The sky blazed orange and purple. "You know," he said quietly, "if I hadn't collapsed that morning, I might have never met you." Grace smiled gently. "Then maybe collapsing was the only way to make you stand right." They both laughed softly, the sound blending with the evening wind. For the first time, peace felt real, not borrowed or forced, but earned through fire. Yet, even as the wind calmed, Grace sensed that their story wasn't finished. There was one last chapter waiting, one that would turn gratitude into grace and closure into legacy. The day the vocational centre opened, the city came alive with celebration. Banners fluttered in the wind, music filled the air, and people from every walk of life gathered to witness what everyone called the House of Grace. The president's representative arrived to cut the ribbon, cameras flashed, and journalists filled their notebooks with stories of miracles and second chances. Grace stood beside Ethan on the podium, dressed in a white gown that reflected sunlight like peace itself. Her heart trembled. Not from fear, but from gratitude. She remembered cleaning corridors barefoot, praying for rent, wondering if life would ever change. Now she was speaking to hundreds. "This place," she said into the microphone, her voice steady, "is proof that God can take what the world throws away and turn it into something priceless." The crowd erupted in applause. That evening, after the ceremony ended and the crowd dispersed, Ethan and Grace remained on the rooftop overlooking the city lights. "You named it after me," she said softly. Ethan smiled. "No, I named it after the virtue you carry." Silence lingered, the kind that says everything without words. "Grace," he began, his tone different now, vulnerable. "When you first saved my life, I thought it was coincidence. Now I know it was purpose. You didn't just breathe air into me. You breathed meaning back into my soul." Grace looked down, unsure how to respond. "Sir?" she began, but he stopped her gently. "Don't call me sir tonight." His voice trembled slightly. "Just Ethan." The moment felt suspended between heaven and earth. "Ethan," she whispered, tasting the strangeness of equality. He stepped closer, eyes reflecting the city lights. "I've faced death twice," he said, "and both times, your face was the first thing I saw. I don't want to live another day without honouring that." From his pocket, he pulled a small velvet box and opened it. Inside, a simple gold ring. Grace froze, breath caught in her throat. "I'm not worthy of this," she said in disbelief. "You're wrong," Ethan replied. "You're the only one who understands the worth behind wealth." Tears welled in her eyes. She shook her head. "People will never accept it." Ethan smiled softly. "Then let's give them a story too beautiful to argue with." Under the fading light, she said yes, not out of fairy tale fantasy, but out of quiet conviction. That night, the wind carried whispers through the city streets, the janitor and the billionaire. Some mocked, some blessed, some doubted. But Grace slept with peace in her heart for the first time in years. She didn't know that even in blessings, old enemies sometimes wait for one last strike. The weeks following their engagement felt like living inside a fragile dream. The news broke again, this time like wildfire. "Billionaire Ethan Cole to marry former janitor," one headline read. "Love or publicity?" another asked. Opinions divided the city. Churches preached sermons about humility. Tabloids sold gossip about betrayal. Grace tried to ignore it all, focusing on the centre's progress. But hate has a way of crawling under locked doors. One morning she arrived at the site to find the gate vandalized with red paint. "Gold digger!" The workers stared silently. Grace's throat tightened, but she smiled anyway. "Let them talk," she whispered. "Our work will answer for us." Ethan, however, was furious. He filed defamation suits, blocked media outlets, and tightened security. But the pressure began to show. Board members resigned, sponsors withdrew, and the company's stock value dipped. One night, he paced his study restlessly. "Maybe they're right," he said bitterly. "Maybe I've lost everything because I followed my heart." Grace took his hand gently. "No, Ethan. You're losing what was never meant to stay. What remains will be real." He looked into her eyes, tired but full of belief, and something in him steadied again. "You're stronger than I am," he said softly. "No," she smiled, "just less afraid of falling." A week before their wedding, tragedy struck again. Fire broke out at the vocational centre late at night, flames rising high, devouring months of work. Grace arrived barefoot, rushing through smoke and shouting workers. "Water, bring water!" she cried, tears streaming down her face. Ethan arrived moments later, his heart sinking as he saw everything they'd built turn to ash. The fire department worked through the night, but by dawn the building was gone. Grace stood in silence, soot on her face, her eyes hollow. "We'll rebuild," Ethan said hoarsely. She shook her head weakly. "It's like God's testing if we meant what we said." He placed his hands on her shoulders. "Then we'll prove we did." As the smoke faded, so did the noise. Donations began to pour in, not from corporations but from ordinary people who had been inspired by Grace's story. Bus drivers, market women, teachers, all giving what they could. One little boy handed her a coin and said, "Auntie Grace, this is for your house." She knelt down, weeping as she hugged him. That day, she realized that true wealth isn't built by money. It's built by hearts that remember kindness. 3 months later, the new House of Grace reopened. Bigger, brighter, and stronger than before. The opening day felt like redemption dressed in sunlight. As Grace walked through the halls, she saw faces that once mocked her now filled with admiration. Ethan watched her from a distance, his heart full. "You've changed the city," he said when they stood alone. "No," she replied with a soft smile. "The city changed because we dared to love it." He laughed quietly, pride and peace blending in his voice. "Then let's keep daring." That evening, the city held a gala in their honor. The hall glittered with chandeliers and laughter. Dignitaries, artists, and even former critics attended. When Grace stepped onto the stage to give her speech, silence fell. "There was a time," she began, "when I thought humility meant staying small. But I've learned that true humility is not denying your light. It's shining it without arrogance." The crowd applauded thunderously. Ethan joined her on stage, holding her hand as they smiled for the cameras. The same flashbulbs that once burned her now illuminated her triumph. But just as peace returned, life delivered one last test. Later that night, after the gala, Grace and Ethan were driving home when their car skidded on a wet road and hit a barrier. Ethan shielded her as the impact shook the vehicle. When Grace woke in the hospital hours later, Ethan was nowhere in sight. Panic filled her chest. "Where is he?" she cried. The nurse hesitated, tears glistening in her eyes. "He didn't make it," she whispered. The world collapsed around her. Grace screamed, a sound that tore through the sterile walls. The man she had saved, the man who saved her back, was gone. Days turned into weeks of grief. She refused interviews, refused food, refused comfort. At the funeral, she stood alone by his grave, rain drenching her hair and dress. "You said we'd keep daring," she whispered. "You didn't say I'd have to do it alone." Then, as thunder rolled across the sky, she remembered his words. "If doing right ruins me, then maybe I built the wrong empire." She placed her hand on the tombstone and said through tears, "Then I'll build the right one, for both of us." A year passed. The House of Grace Foundation grew into a movement, spreading across regions, building centers for the poor, scholarships for orphans, and training programs for workers. Grace became a national figure, not for wealth, but for wisdom. People began calling her Mama Grace, the woman who turned heartbreak into hope. Her story was told in schools, her quotes painted on walls. But she never sought fame. She still lived in her modest apartment, still prayed at dawn, still cleaned her own floors. Her ring and the symbol of love and sacrifice never left her finger. One morning, she visited the site where the first center had burned down. A small garden had been planted there in Ethan's memory. She knelt beside the stone that bore his name and smiled faintly. "You see, Ethan? We kept our promise. The world remembers us not for what we owned, but for what we gave." The wind rustled softly as if answering her. In that silence, she felt peace, the kind that doesn't depend on endings, only on purpose. She stood and looked toward the horizon where the sun rose in soft gold. It felt like his spirit smiling back at her. As she walked away, children ran past her laughing, shouting her name. One little girl tugged at her dress. "Mama Grace," she said, "is it true you once kissed a man and changed everything?" Grace laughed, her eyes glistening. "Yes, my dear. But it wasn't the kiss that changed everything. It was the heart behind it." She turned to the crowd that had gathered for her weekly address. Her voice carried wisdom and warmth. "My children," she said, "never look down on anyone. God hides miracles in ordinary people. Sometimes the hands you refuse to touch are the same hands He will use to lift you." The crowd clapped softly, their faces full of hope. Grace smiled, gazing at the sky one last time before heading inside the center to continue her work. Her footsteps echoed through the marble halls, steady and sure, the sound of faith fulfilled. The sun bathed the building in golden light, as though heaven itself was applauding. And as the wise ones in her village would later say, God may delay, but he never forgets, for the heart that stays honest will never remain poor forever. The end.